I've been working as a security guard at this factory complex in Detroit for about 6 months now. It's not the best job, but it pays okay and keeps the bills covered. I sit most of the time watching cameras, making sure nobody's sneaking around where they don't belong. It's quiet most nights, just me and a bunch of empty buildings. I've been doing the overnight shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. since I started. It's rough and sleep, but I manage. The factory is an old place. Used to make auto parts back in the day. Most of it's empty now, just a few buildings still running. And at night, it's all shadows and echoes with rats scurrying around sometimes. I start my shift checking the doors, making sure they're locked up tight, and then I settle into the security office, sipping coffee and watching the camera feeds. Every couple of hours, I do a walk around, shine my flashlight into the dark corners, and to be honest, it's boring, but it's money. But one night, though, everything went bad. It was cold, Michigan cold, the kind that gets into your bones. And I was on my third cup of coffee, feeling tired because I hadn't slept good the day before. And I was staring at the screens when I saw something on camera 3 out by the back loading dock. It looked like a shadow moving, quick, sneaky, and I leaned closer, squinting, but it was too dark to tell. I remember thinking at first that it could have been nothing, but I saw it again, darting across the feed, and I just kind of sighed, grabbed my flashlight and my jacket, and headed out. The factory is a maze at night, big old buildings with alleys between them. I shined my light around, checking the loading dock. The door was shut, no sign of anyone breaking in, and then I walked over to the fence and saw it was intact with no holes. I figured maybe it was just wind blowing trash around. And I was about to head back when I heard something like a snicker. Real quiet. I froze, listening hard, and then out of the shadows they came at me. There were 4 or 5 of them, all wearing masks like Halloween or something like that. And they were younger. I could tell by how they moved, very jumpy and full of energy, like kids hyped up on sugar. One of them shoved me hard, and I stumbled back, almost dropping my flashlight. And before I could even really work out what was happening, another one of them punched me in the gut so hard it knocked the wind out of me. I doubled over gasping, and then they were all on me, hitting and kicking like a pack of wild animals. I tried to fight back, even swung my flashlight at one of them, but they were too fast. Someone grabbed it and tossed it away before another kid punched me in the face, and I felt my nose crack and I could feel blood starting to come down. I could taste it in my sinuses. I tried to yell, but they kept hitting me, knocking me off my feet over and over. Someone kicked my legs out, and I went down hard, pain shooting through my knees and hands as I hit the gravel. But they didn't stop there. Kicks landed on my ribs, my back, my arms. I curled up, trying to cover my head, but it didn't do much good. The pain was everywhere, and I could hear them laughing loud and crazy like it was some type of game. It was sick the way they enjoyed it. They acted like kids, but mean ones, the kind that had pull wings off of flies just to watch them squirm. And that scared me more than the pain, the way they didn't care, the way they seemed to like it. And this went on for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been. And finally, one of them smashed me in the head, and that's really when everything went black, just a sudden nothing, like someone flipped a switch. And when I woke up, it was still dark and still cold. I was laying on the ground. My face pressed into the gravel. My head was pounding and my mouth still tasted like blood. I tried to move, but my whole body screamed at me. My ribs felt like they were burning and my hands wouldn't work right, and I spat out blood and some pieces of my teeth. They'd messed me up bad. I didn't know how long I'd been out. Those kids were gone. No sign of them. My clothes were torn and my shoes were missing. They must have taken them. Air Jordans 96. I felt for my wallet and it was still in my pocket. Guess they didn't want money, just wanted to hurt me. I got to my feet, slow and shaky, dizzy as hell, and every step hurt. But I leaned against the wall and started stumbling back to the office. I kept tripping, my legs weak, my ribs stabbing me with every breath. But finally, I made it to the security office, fell into the chair, and grabbed the phone. My hands were shaking so bad I could hardly dial 911. I mumbled something about being attacked, gave them the address, and then I just sat there, waiting, trying not to pass out again. The paramedics showed up pretty quickly. The lights were flashing, and they loaded me onto a stretcher and they asked me what happened, but my jaw hurt way too much to even really talk at that point. They took me to the hospital and I spent a few days there, all bandaged up. Doc said that I had broken ribs, a concussion, fractures in my fingers, and a busted up face. They even pulled out some teeth and gave me some painkillers and said that I was lucky that it wasn't worse. But I didn't feel very lucky though. The cops came by while I was resting. Two of them, one older guy and one younger. They asked me to describe the attackers, but I didn't have much to give. Masks covered their faces and it was dark. I told them they were young, fast, laughing like maniacs, but that was it. They wrote it down and said they'd look into it, but I don't think I ever heard from them again. I guess I knew they wouldn't find those kids. There are too many shadows in Detroit to hide in. And after a few days, they let me go home. I was still hurting and I couldn't do much but sit around. Couldn't work, that's for sure. I had 2 kids depending on me, and I didn't know how I was going to pay those bills. My daughter, she's 8, cried when she saw me all banged up. My son, 12, tried to act tough, but I could tell he was shook. I told them that I had an accident at work and didn't want them to be scared knowing the actual truth. My sister helped out, coming over with food and changing my bandages, and she's a nurse, so she did know what to do. I hated needing her like that, though, but I couldn't manage alone. Getting out of bed was a fight every day. My ribs ached, my hands didn't grip right with those broken fingers, and I felt useless, like I couldn't even take care of myself, let alone my kids. I kept thinking about that night over and over. Why'd they do it? Just for kicks? I ain't never hurt nobody, and I only was just doing my job. It just didn't make any sense. My boss called and said that they were sorry it happened, said they'd add more security, maybe another guard, and it didn't make me feel much better. The other guards, when I finally went back, clapped me on the shoulder and said that they were glad I was okay. But I saw the worry in their eyes. Nobody wanted to think it could be them next. The cops never caught those kids and probably never will, and it tears me up to think that they got away clean, and I'm stuck with these scars. It just ain't right. But what can I do? Life ain't fair, I guess, and I'm more careful now, always looking around, expecting trouble, and maybe that's good, keeps me sharp. But it also showed me how quick things can go bad and how you can't always stop it. I just keep going for my kids, for myself, and I guess there ain't no other choice. Story 2. I grew up in Modesto in the 1980s, and honestly, I fell in with a kind of bad crowd. I had a couple of friends end up in jail. I had a couple end up in the ground too. But it was the ones that said enough is enough that I really admired. The ones that got out before the life we lived became an anchor around our necks. I decided to clean myself up, and since driving was kind of my thing, I figured that I'd get a job at a cab company so I could earn an honest living while still driving around the city that I knew and loved. By 1991, I was 24, and I'd been taking fares around Modesto for almost 2 years. It was a hell of a job, let me tell you. And every so often, I got a real character in the back of my cab. Like this one time, I had this raspy voice little guy flag me down. And when I asked him his story, it turned out he was Sonny Barger, a founding member of the Hells Angels. I asked why he wasn't on his bike, and he looks me dead in the eye through my rear view and says, "'Cause I've had 14 beers, 5 shots of tequila, and I'm too goddamn old to spend the night in jail." I laughed my ass off with the guy, and he was a great tipper too. So shout out to the Hells Angels, I guess. But not everyone was so cool or entertaining. In fact, I picked up 1 or 2 passengers in my time that got me in a hell of a lot of trouble. And this is one of them. So it was August 2nd of 1991 around 8:30 at night, because the sun had just gone down and I was driving down the avenue about to take the 108 toward downtown. It was a Friday, so I knew I was in for a busy night, and I was just about to take my turn when I saw a girl standing at the side of the road sticking her thumb out to passing cars. My first thought was, it is not the time to be hitchhiking out here, because Fridays and Saturdays always got a little crazier when the sun went down. So I pulled over next to her, honked my horn, and then when she came up to my driver's side, I didn't even get to ask where she was headed before she said something like, "I don't got any money, sorry." I just really need a ride. And from the sound of her voice, how shaky it was, I could tell that she'd been crying. So rather than just drive off like some jerk, I told her to hop in and that I'd give her a free ride. She responds with, "Oh my God, really? Oh, thank you so much." Very grateful, and that it sounds like she's going to start crying again. So she hops in the back of my cab and she tells me that she wants to go to the airport. I tell her my name, then ask her what hers is. And then as we're driving, I start asking if she's okay, and that I know you're not, but asking what's wrong is too forward kind of way. She tells me she's just ended things with her boyfriend of 3 years, that she's headed to the airport to catch a plane to Florida, which was where her grandparents lived. I told her how sorry I was, but that she'd be surprised to know just how many young women like her I gave rides to on a weekly or sometimes even daily basis. It's a sad fact of life that relationships sometimes fall apart, and when they do, someone usually pulls the old Hail Mary full of grace, "Get me out of this goddamn place." And that's where yours truly comes in. She didn't laugh, but I didn't expect her to either. So after my dumb attempt at humor, I started saying how happy I was to lend an ear if she wanted someone to talk to. She had to get herself together a little before she started talking. And she was a slow starter too. Just didn't know where to begin, I guess. But once she got going, she got going. So I shut up, let her talk, and listened to her story. She moved to California from the East Coast for college, met her boyfriend during her junior year, then moved in with him after she graduated and needed a place to stay. She said when they met, he'd been the perfect gentleman. He'd supported her emotionally through those final 2 years of college, then financially for a while too, after she graduated and was looking for a job. He'd always been kind and patient with her, but then over time, while she was still trying to find work, he started to change. He got less and less patient and more mean. They never used to fight at all. Then over time, it got to the point they were fighting 2 or 3 times a week. She said the field she wanted to work in was very competitive, and that while she was working her butt off, sending out resumes and making calls, she wasn't having any luck. But then the longer that went on, the more impatient her boyfriend was getting. And over time, it became this huge source of tension that she wasn't contributing at all. She said she was looking for waitress jobs and stuff right at the time they had their huge breakup fight. By then, her boyfriend wasn't interested. He told her to pack her bags, started throwing some of her stuff around. Then things started to escalate, and the fight ended violently before she ran out of the house with her suitcase all packed. My dad used to get violent with my mom before he walked out on her. So, as soon as she said that last thing, I was ready to drive back to where she'd come from and give her ex an ass-kicking before driving her back to the airport. I told her I was sorry things ended that way. Then asked if she was all right, if she needed me to take her to the hospital first thing or anything like that. She said no, that he hadn't really hurt her. But then I asked if she wanted me to stop so she could call the cops. And for the first time, she gave me this immediate, desperate reply of no. And that was the first warning sign right there. The thing that made me think that I might have seriously misjudged the situation in front of me. I told her that if he'd hit her or broke any of her stuff, then it was important to report that sort of stuff to the cops so that they at least had it on record. But she insisted I just drive her to the airport so she could leave to go with her grandparents. At the time, I understood the impulse, or at least I thought I did. The poor girl just went through something traumatic. She didn't want to hang around going over a play-by-play with a bunch of bozos. She just wanted to get away from it. But like I said, there was something about that. No, that sounded a little too desperate. I asked if she did anything like hit him back, and that's why she wasn't so focused on talking to the law. But I was also quick to reassure her that the cops would consider anything she did in self-defense to be just that, self-defense. She started saying how they wouldn't see it that way, but when I asked why not, she straight up snapped at me. She says, because they won't. All right, now, can you just take me to the airport? I'm begging you. She started off all cold and angry, but by the time she got to the Heath, I'm begging you part, she was back to sounding like a scared little girl again. I guess that tugged at my heartstrings enough for me to back down a little, just not quite enough for me to drop it altogether. I kept quiet for a moment or two, gave her some time to breathe, and suggested if her ex had done something like hit her, then the best revenge would be having him spend a night in the cell. And then she muttered, "That's not going to happen." I didn't see it for what it was, so I followed up with something like, "Are you really going to let this piece of trash do you like this?" That's when she said with this heavy tone of voice that set the hairs on the back of my neck on end, "He's not going to do anything to anyone anymore." Bingo. Their fight had ended in violence. All right, but not with this girl's ex smacking her around. It ended with her doing something to him. And the way she said that last thing about him not doing anything anymore, it made me think she'd done more than just slap him or whatever. I started saying something like, "Miss, if you did something bad, I gotta let you out of the cab. Otherwise, you're making me an accessory to whatever's going on." I didn't know if that was 100% true at the time, but I'd heard it was. And that was enough for me. So that's what I said. I also added that if all she did was toss a lamp at him or something like that to keep him away from her, then whatever. I'd take her to the airport. But if she did something else, if she left him bleeding somehow and in need of a hospital, then that was another story. As I waited for her answer, I heard her rustling around in the back. My eyes darted up to the rear view, and I saw her reaching into her jacket seconds before I heard the distinct click of a handgun being armed. I've been robbed 3 times in 2 years by that point, so I knew that sound well enough to know that the girl I first thought was the innocent victim of domestic abuse had just pulled a gun on me in the back seat. I remember how the words, "Well, there, miss, there's no need to do anything rash," came out of my mouth without me even trying to speak. Then that same shaky, teary-eyed sound returned to her, a voice as she said, "Just take me to the airport. I don't want to do anything to you, so please don't make me. I just want to get out of here." I didn't ask her anything else. I wanted to. Good Lord, I wanted to. But I valued my life far more than I valued getting any more answers. I figured there might be a chance there was a dude out there someplace lying on his kitchen floor bleeding to death with a bullet in his gut. Maybe a scumbag who hit his girl did deserve to suffer a little. But I don't believe in the death penalty. I wanted to know more than anything if some poor son of a Pleist was crawling around in a pile of his own blood and poop, because God knows I'd want someone to call me an ambulance if I'd heard about it. I did end up calling someone, but that came later, and I guess I should just get on with the story. So I just drove, not saying a goddamned word because I was terrified and I'm not afraid to say it. This girl had all but admitted to shooting a man. And I had this creeping feeling she might do it again if it meant not being able to get to her grandparents. That's even if there were any grandparents, because if that were me, I'd be thinking more about some place in South America than heading to Florida. I drove her all the way to the airport, not saying a word. Then when we got close to the little drop-off point, the girl told me to stop the car and that she'd walk the rest of the way. I did as she asked. Stopped the car in the darkness away from the crowd of people getting in and out of cars. And then she asked me to turn off the engine and hand over my keys. I figured she wasn't about to shoot me, not close enough to all those people for them to hear the gunshots. So at first I said, "I can't do that, miss. I gotta make a living." But then, in a way that made my blood run cold as ice in my veins, I think she showed me the real her for a second. I'd kind of half turned my head as I told her I didn't want to give her my keys. And I was about to tell her how I wouldn't say a word to anybody when she stuck the barrel of that gun right in my face. And when I say she stuck it in my face, I don't mean she just pointed it at me. I mean she shoved the muzzle into the skin of my temple so hard it hurt and then told me, "Give me your keys." I had one last bit of resistance in me, one last appeal to her good nature, and I tried to tell her, "You can't just take away a man's means of making money. How am I supposed to feed my kids if I can't drive my cab?" I didn't have any kids at the time, but I've said just about anything to keep a hold of my keys because I wasn't kidding when I said I needed them to make a living. But she didn't even let me get past "you can't" before she exploded about how I wasn't allowed to tell her anything. how all men were the same, thinking they could control every woman, and how this one wasn't going to let that happen. She then repeated that I was to give her my keys, or I wouldn't be going home to see my non-existent kids that night, or any night for that matter. I'm not stupid. I knew the best thing to do from there on out was to shut the F up and do as she told me. So I handed over my keys, watched her climb out of my cab before she dragged her suitcase out behind her, and then as she walked off towards the terminal with that same poor me attitude she'd had when I first saw her. I waited till she was out of sight, then rushed towards the terminal to where the peons were, and then called 911, looking over my shoulder the whole time. I knew there might be airport security inside the terminal, but I also knew the girl would not be too happy to see me there, and I didn't want to risk getting shot when I could just call the cops from outside the building. I wasn't going anywhere. That girl had my keys, so I had to just sit outside the terminal and wait for the cops to show up. But by the time they did, the girl had put herself on the first flight to the Bahamas or wherever she went, having obviously gotten rid of that gun somehow. But not my car key. I had to get some help jump-starting my cab just to get home. Then my cab was basically out of action until the company could get a new key shipped to them. But I had my life, and man did that feel like something special after having that crazy in my back seat. Story 3. I used to be the area manager for a small chain of late niners here in Minnesota, and of all the strange incidents in my career, this was the most frightening. I wasn't at the diner the night it happened, but 2 of my employees were. It was a small spot just off the highway, open 24 hours, and surrounded by a field, some woods, and a very lonely stretch of road. Jenny and Mike had both been there for years when it happened, but after that night, they both quit and didn't tell anyone but the cops what had happened. All I had to piece together was the security footage and a few vague hints from the police. And years later, I still think about what I saw and what I'll never figure out. I remember it being one of those brutal winter nights, the kind where the wind must have been rattling the diner like it was trying to get inside for a bowl of hot dish. Mike was our cook, a solid worker in his 40s with a wife and 2 kids who worked the night shift for the extra cash. Jenny was the waitress, a single mom in her 20s who was sharp as a knife and great with crowd control on her busier nights. They were reliable, the kind of employees you could trust, but who could handle themselves too. But that night, something walked into the diner that nothing could have prepared them for. I was at home sleeping when a phone call woke me up. The moment they said it was the police, it was like half a dozen espressos hit me all at once. And I listened as they said there had been an incident at the diner and how they needed access to the office so they could review the security tape. They didn't elaborate. They just said that it was bad and that Mike and Jenny were involved. I dragged myself out of bed and my stomach was all knotted up with worry. And then I drove through the snow with my head spinning with questions. Was it a robbery? 2 groups of drunk customers who had started a brawl? Or was it something more serious? By the time I got there, I had a whole bunch of different theories already laid out. But what I saw on that tape was something a whole lot worse than anything I'd expected. When I arrived at the diner, an officer in uniform was waiting for me, and then I led him to a cramped back office with an old beat-up TV and a dusty VHS player. He said he'd needed to take the tape with him as evidence, but he also asked if we could watch it first, just so he had a better idea of what had taken place. I said sure. Rewound the tape to the time he requested, 2:30 a.m., and then after I pressed play, it came alive on the screen. It was quiet out front, with Mike in the kitchen scrubbing down the counters, and Jenny out front, wiping down tables in the dim light. Then the door swung open, and 2 men walked in. They were maybe late 20s or early 30s, dressed in faded jeans and thick jackets, but it wasn't their coats that sent my nerves on edge. It was their faces. One had a tattoo on his neck that ran up onto his face, and the other had these cold, very hollow eyes that didn't seem to blink. They acted calm at first, like they were just a couple of drifters who wanted a burger. They slid on the stools at the counter, and Jenny took their order. Mike cooked with his back to them, then Jenny brought the plates out, They kept to themselves while they ate, heads down and not doing much talking. I kept hoping that they'd finish and leave. Only obviously they didn't. Out of nowhere, the one with the face tattoo reached into his hoodie and pulls out a handgun. The other followed, drawing his own before they each aimed at Mike and Jenny, who froze mid-motion like deer caught in headlights. Jenny's eyes went wide and her face went slack. Her mouth was wide open, like a scream was just stuck in her throat. Mike's hands jerked up, trembling so bad that I could even see it in that terrible footage. And the two men didn't rush. With their guns, they motioned for Mike and Jenny to come out from behind the counter. They stumbled forward on shaky legs, with Jenny clutching the edge of the counter for a second before letting go. The two men then herded them to the back toward the walk-in fridge, and I figured they'd lock them inside before raiding the register in the safe. But instead, after shoving Mike and Jenny inside, they stepped in after them and pulled the heavy door shut behind them. The camera stayed on that closed door, and it stayed closed for 5, then 10, then 20 solid minutes, and I had to fast forward the tape a bunch of times, starting and stopping. But still, the door stayed closed as my mind started to tick over, asking questions like, why go inside with them? And what the hell are they doing in there? I pictured Mike and Jenny in that freezing cold walk-in. 37 minutes is a long time to be trapped with two armed strangers in a box you can't escape. And the longer I watched, the worse that feeling of dread got in me. My mind started trying to fill in the blanks. Maybe they were threatening them while holding the guns to their heads, making them do things so unthinkable I can't even name them. The walk-in was big, but only by fridge standards. There was barely room for 4 people standing up. Were they standing there shivering, too scared to do anything but what they were being told? But the tape gives me no clues. Finally, exactly 37 minutes after the door to the walk-in closed behind them, it opened up again. The two men stepped out, completely relaxed, like they just finished a bathroom break. The one with a face tattoo tugged his hoodie straight, while the other scanned the room with those two empty eyes of his. And then they strolled back through the diner, not even glancing at the safe back in the office or cash register stuffed with bills. They didn't take a damn thing. Not a dime, not a burger, nothing. They headed for the door, moving casually like they'd done what was the most normal thing in the world. Then they slipped out, climbed into a dark car parked just out of frame, and vanished into the snowy night. I sat there with the police officer standing next to me, and I remember my hands being clammy and how my heart thudded hard and fast in my chest. They didn't steal anything. They held 2 people at gunpoint for over half an hour in a freezing walk-in and walked away empty-handed. Or at least that was what it looked like on the surface. But why? What did they do to Mike and Jenny in there? And the tape rolled on. About 15 minutes later, one of our regulars shuffled in. A trucker who always came in for coffee at odd hours. He looked around at the empty diner with his coat all dusted with snow, and then after a few minutes of waiting around, he wandered behind the counter, probably wondering where the hell everyone was. He did the same thing in the back, just sort of wandered around shyly for a few minutes. And then after maybe 10 to 15 minutes of checking absolutely everywhere but the walk-in, he cracked it open and looked inside. He could see the exact moment that he saw something inside the walk-in because he pulled backwards. You couldn't see his face on the camera really at first, but as he walked away, another camera caught his expression and he obviously looked like he'd seen a ghost. Back in the dining area, he fumbled for his phone and started calling someone 911. But right after, he darted to the grills and shut them off so the place wouldn't burn down. Bless his heart. And after that, he kept pacing as he talked on his phone, throwing these nervous glances at the fridge with his shoulders hunched like he expected something to, burst out of it. And 2 cops showed up minutes later. They talked to the regular. Then after approaching the fridge, one of the officers nudged the door open with his boot. It looked like he'd yelled something with a gesture, like a sort of come-out motion. And then Jenny staggered out. Her hands were plastered over her eyes, and she was shaking so hard that one of the officers had to support her as she came out. Mike followed soon after, his own hands pressed tight against his face, but he moved differently. slower, like he wasn't so sure about leaving the walk-in. Suddenly, as the cops were guiding him away, Mike kind of twisted back away from them. Then, with his face covered with one hand, he reached for the door and tried to walk back inside. The cops yanked him backwards away from it, but Mike was trying to get back in the walk-in like his life depended on it. As the cops dealt with Mike's weird outburst, Jenny collapsed into a booth and curled up into a ball, with her hand still shielding her face. A few minutes later, the cops seemed to talk Mike down, and they were able to walk him to a booth and sit him down. The cops then tried talking to them, kneeling and gesturing as they did, but it didn't look like they got anything. Mike and Jenny just stayed all catatonic with their hands over their eyes, like they'd seen something so awful they couldn't bear to look at anything else. It was chilling watching them break apart without a word. And it was almost like whatever happened in that fridge had terrified them beyond belief. A little while later, a couple of EMTs rushed in. They talked to Mike and Jenny for a while, then walked them both to an ambulance. But even when they were outside, Jenny and Mike kept their hands clamped over their faces. One cop stayed behind, scribbling down notes, and then I saw myself on the tape bursting in, coat half buttoned with my face, very tense and worried. And when the tape cut off, I felt sick. I remember turning to the detective and demanding to know what had happened in that walk-in, but he just shrugged. Mike and Jenny were in shock, and they weren't talking yet. There were no obvious injuries either, so apparently my guess was as good as his. The men hadn't beaten them or cut them, but whatever they did do, it had shattered them psychologically. The officer told me that they were digging for answers, but that was all they knew so far. After locking up behind me, I left the diner in a kind of horrified daze. Mike and Jenny were my people. I cared about them, and hearing they'd gone through something so terrible had my heart breaking in my chest. I tried seeing them at the hospital the next morning, but the staff turned me away. Then I tried calling their homes in the days afterwards, but neither wanted to talk to me. Then one at a time over the weeks that followed, they each quit the diner. I heard Mike later move to California, abandoning his wife and kids. She told me he was a wreck in the days before he left, not talking at all, barely sleeping or eating. And then one day, poof, he was gone. Jenny fled to a farm in Iowa with family and tried to piece herself together. Her mom later told me she was doing much better, but she'd still only talk in short, clipped sentences. The police report was a dead end too, and only referred to what had happened as an incident with no specifics to speak of. And the diner changed after that. The staff at the other branches started gossiping about it being some kind of gang thing. Others swore it was some kind of twisted game, like they'd heard him for fun. One cook even muttered about some kind of government conspiracy, but obviously I brushed that off. No one knew what was happening to Jenny and Mike, except Jenny and Mike. But the not knowing just made it worse. Customers stopped coming at night, scared off by the rumors, and I couldn't blame them. I hated being there too, standing in a place where something so terrible had obviously happened. I added a night guard, triple-checked the cameras, and had panic buttons installed, but it felt like an empty gesture. The damage had already been done, and time dragged on. We hired new staff, and the night customs slowly trickled back, but I never forgot what happened there. I'd drive by at night, see the neon sign flickering away, and wondered who those men were. Sometimes I'd watch that tape back on my home computer and let those 37 minutes just roll by. And sometimes it went fast, and other times it felt like an eternity. Were they still out there planning something else? And what was it they did in the first place that broke Mike and Jenny so badly? Eventually I stopped watching the tape and taught myself to stop asking questions too, because these days I feel like I'm better off not knowing. Music.